You're listening to Hackers to Founders with Chris Magistrato.
And Chris, honestly, that is what built. I mean, people will ask me, were you like a very astute businessman? This I wouldn't say I was any of that back in the day, right? I was just a security researcher in love with my work who was very, very generous in putting his work out there, sharing it with everybody, getting every opportunity to help someone, give out free videos. And what hit me back then is, what? All the right people in the community understand how much work that takes and are willing to support you back. So, yeah, that is really how the company started getting built. And even when I did Pentester Academy, we were the first in the whole industry, right? Back then, OffSec and all of these guys were charging thousands of dollars. SANS, of course, would charge your whole house. I'd take like a second mortgage to do like a SANS course. uh, but we kept it down at just $39 a month and basically said, look, all you can eat, come and try this out. And that just grew the company like anything. And I was so happy because I felt I was asking for something which was affordable while being able to build a great business, but educating so many people.
This is Hackers to Founders, a podcast about cybersecurity professionals who have reached the pinnacle of their cybersecurity expertise and have ventured into new frontiers, whether it's launching innovative startups or making impactful investments in our industry. My name is Chris Magistrato, and I'm a vulnerability researcher best known for traveling and meeting hackers from all around the world. And I'm using what little extrovert skills I have to introduce to you hackers that are changing the world. And welcome to Hackers to Founders. Today, we are joined by a cybersecurity trailblazer whose career blends technical mastery, entrepreneur success, and an unyielding passion for pushing the boundaries of security. Vivek Ramachandran has made groundbreaking contributions from discovering vulnerabilities like the Cafe Latte tech to founding SecurityTube and Pentester Academy. With over 2 decades in the field, Vivek's work has influenced professionals in more than 100 countries. Now, as the founder of SquareX, he is pioneering industry's first browser detection and response solution that detects, mitigates, and threat hunt client-side web attacks targeting employees in real time. Vivek's dynamic career also includes global training tours, best-selling books, memorable talks at DEF CON, and was recently invited to join the Black Hat Arsenal Review Board. Please join me in welcoming Vivek to the show, Hackers to Founders. Welcome to the show, Vivek.
Thanks so much, Chris, for that kind introduction. Really excited to be on the show and speak with you today.
And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. It really helps. And if you're on Spotify, please give us 5 stars. Thanks. Yeah, we're happy to have you here as well. So, would love to hear more about your childhood and before everything, before security and stuff like that. Just where were you at in the world and how did things progress? And then we can kind of get into the security journey for you.
Yeah. So I think, kind of going way back, I was born and brought up in India, in a city called Calcutta, which is in the eastern part of India. And I would say, at that time, Chris, I mean, there were no computers, at least in India back then. I think I saw my very first computer when I was almost like 18 years, I think 17 or 18 years. And the big aha moment happened because, my mother has 6 sisters and all 6 of them are actually doctors in the New York, New Jersey area because they'd moved from India a
Wow.
long time back. Yeah.
So they're older sisters that already gone to the United States and been, if they're doctors, highly successful then, yeah?
Correct. And interestingly, they had just purchased PCs for their kids. So, one of my mom's sisters called her up and basically said, "Oh, this is this new big thing happening in America right now, which is, all the kids are starting to learn computers, and you should get it for Vivek and Preeti, who's my sister, right? Preeti is the name of my sister." So then my mom ended up getting that computer, and as crazy as it sounds, in India to import a compact Presario back in those days was like $3,000 to $4,000.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, because there was a massive import duty. It took a fair bit of work to go ahead and kind of send it. I don't remember if it was FedEx or something else back in those days. And it was a family decision. Literally, like my dad, mom, everybody had to sit together and decide, right? That was a lot of money way back in India. So that was my introduction to computers. I mean, way before cybersecurity. And and
I'm thinking about all the processes of they were all doctors, and the Vivek's gonna be a doctor, and then your family had a council meeting saying like, we won't, no, he will be in computers. And then they just made this grand gesture to bring that computer to you. Was there like a lot of pressure for you to succeed in this area? Or was it like, do your best kind of thing?
I think at that point, no one really knew how much computers would change the world, to be frank. This was the early days of the internet. To give you context, I think even Google had been founded in the year 2000, and we are probably talking 1998 at this point. Um, so as crazy it sounds, I don't remember when Google was founded, but I know that 2000 was when at least I heard of it. But uh, and at that point in time, I think the whole question was, hey, how can you use computers? So I used it to look at physics and chemistry problems because I was preparing for an engineering entrance exam in India called the Indian Institute of Technology, which is the hardest engineering exam out there. I think 200,000 people appear and they only have 2,000 seats.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So everybody prepares for that exam, and I thought that maybe I could find something online to help me with it. Uh, as crazy as it sounds, those were back in the day where you could only get a text terminal internet account, which is you had to use a browser called Links, and all you could look at was the text
Links,
version.
yeah, I've used links not for fun, just to see what the hell this thing was. That's very interesting. Okay, yeah.
and and I had to then convince my parents to get me what those days in India was a graphics account for the internet, which is full-blown internet connectivity. And as crazy as it sounds, that used to be roughly around $700 to $800 a month.
A month for the wait for the
Month. I'm
graphics
not even making that
card.
up. Yes, I'm not even making that up because it was so expensive in India to get internet connectivity.
Okay,
Yeah.
so it's a hardware component, and is it like I need to get a loan to be able to afford this thing, or was it like I got to make payments on this thing? Like the concept of like doing a subscription model for hardware just blows my mind. Is
So they used to loan you the modem, and then they used to also give you the whole kind of like pipe once you connect to their computers and all of that.
oh, okay, damn.
And yeah, half of the time, you wouldn't be able to dial in. And if you did manage to dial in, you would have to disconnect every 30 minutes because all of a sudden the connection would go stale. And the only way to get back is disconnect and reconnect. So this was probably 1998, 1999. Yeah, I mean, so I was very lucky, and honestly, I feel like had it not been for my parents getting me a computer early, I would have never fallen in love with computers and eventually with cybersecurity.
Okay. Wow. So when you were doing this, were you doing any programming at the time, or was it just strictly like I just got to get on the damn internet, or I got to get on before I do anything else?
Yeah, I think at that point in time, barely anything much was happening in India. I think this was the very early days of the whole technology revolution. So I'll tell you how I got into programming. So what happened is when I was preparing for these IIT exams, and this is now like 1 year ahead, year 2000, 1999 or 2000. There was this massive DDoS attack which happened against Yahoo, Alta Vista, and all the older sites and brought them down. And I got to know that this was a German hacker by the name of Mixter who had created a DDoS tool suite called TFN or Tribal Flood Network. I downloaded the tool, opened it up, understood nothing. And then when I called one of my friends next door and I said, "What is it?" And he was like, "This is C programming."
Oh, so your neighbor also knew program, well, just by looking, he knew the language.
He was studying engineering. He was, I think, in like first or second year engineering, computer science. So he knew programming. And then, I just told myself, okay, while I'm still preparing for my engineering exams, why not just dabble a little bit in this? And frankly, there was no intent just apart from this curiosity. How could one guy create a tool which brought down all of these big organizations, right? So there was this asymmetry of power, and all of us hackers love that, right? The fact that
Yeah.
you can bring down a beast 10 times bigger, the whole David versus Goliath thing. So I think I was both young and naive to just relish and enjoy every moment that I skipped through the code, looked at it, and I was like, okay, let's see how I can figure this out. So taught myself C, then taught myself a little bit of assembly programming. Went into the university. Was lucky enough that I was one of those 2,000 out of 200,000 people. Uh, and then I go in, and my class had, I think, 130 people. and only 5 of them had ever seen computers, including me.
Wow. Okay. And let me understand this. So, like, when you were going to university, actually, first question: was there any like computer courses at the time, and like, were you in them, or were you at a different major entirely?
Yeah, so you brought up a great question. So, India has these universities called the Indian Institute of Technologies. Back then, there were just 5 or 6 of them. And you score an all India rank based upon which you can bid to kind of get a certain stream. So, there is computer science, electronics, mechanical engineering, da da da. So for my rank, which was 1067 out of 200,000 people, I could only get electronics and communications because computer science was already taken by people above me in the rank.
Oh, so all those other people realized computer science was also going to pick up, I suppose, as well, and they're like, we got to get in this, and they swooped up those slots, kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So that was unusual, right? And honestly, when I went in, I felt like I want to just do something in electronics and communications.
Okay.
Uh, but putting it bluntly, I hope my teachers don't see this. I think my first year teachers were so bad that I somehow stuck to just keeping on compounding on my computer's knowledge. And there were some programming clauses around data structures and all of that, which were common across like all streams, and that is really where I picked it up. Now, what happened is because I started picking up these very quick tricks of okay, how do we break in, how do we do this, how do we do that. I had an amazing time breaking into computers of all my friends and all of that at the university. And somehow I wanted to keep that lead. So I kept teaching myself more and more programming and computer security while pursuing an electronics and communications major.
So that brings up the question, like, what kind of resources were you looking at? Were you like reading Frac magazines, 2600, something else entirely?
Yeah, great question. So I think yes, I felt so. Frac, the good or bad was, of course, they only come out, if I remember back in those days, every quarter, or was it every month? I don't recall. But they were only picking up highly specialized topics. And the tricky part there was that there was nothing between like how to get started versus where Frac sits, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah, you're right. Yeah.
so it used to be nice to read in the very beginning, but I was like, okay, I can't figure out like when I was reading like alpha ones like buffer overflow, I was like, okay, like how does this part even work? Like there are so many gaps in my own understanding. So back in those days, there's no GitHub, there is no GitLab, there is no repository anywhere, right? So the only way you can learn is by reading other people's code. And there used to be certain magazines like Code Breakers and all of that similar to Frac, but very fragmented knowledge to be honest. So I think what I did is I figured like my basic principles need to be very, very good before I can go into complex topics. And that is really where I think I really went down, downloaded the Linux operating system code, started to look at other attack tools, and just read, I'm not even kidding, hundreds of thousands of lines of code of attack tools, open source security tools. How does Nmap work? And Nmap was there, back in those days as well, by the way. And slowly started tinkering with that, writing modifications to them, but then slowly building, my own tools from scratch. I think honestly, this almost seems to be a lost art today because there is so much of high level libraries that you can start with that very few people go absolutely, down and under into the fundamentals. But I was lucky that I was able to do it, and even today it serves me well because just allows you to understand systems inside out.
Yeah, you bring up a really interesting thing, and it's like you'll have these security practitioners where it's like they know how to use the tools, and they'll be lethal with them. They'll know exactly how to run different types of tools for red team operations or pen testing, but more like red teaming. Like they know exactly what they're looking for, what they need to do, and some of them don't even know programming or don't know about that programming aspect of things, right? Like just because the industry's been so, I don't say segmented, or like you can be an expert at without having to know it. But I think to get the better understanding, like you and me both like to go deeper down and like, okay, like how is this written? How can I make it better and stuff like that? I get down there to the point of like Oh damn! I forgot. I was actually supposed to be doing something else. Like now, I'm building a tool that like at least I like and like it's useful for this situation. But yeah, very good.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so I think you're right. I mean, if you're driven by curiosity, and you have a good amount of time in your hands to do a lot of exploration, you end up teaching yourself like amazing stuff over a long period of time, right? Because all of that understanding, learning, the way you research, the way you look at new topics, all of that compounds as well.
The analogy that you bring up with David Goliath, that was pretty much the exact same thing. Like I was into computers around, so in 2000, I made my first email with AOL. Yeah, right. And then, but it wasn't until I wasn't getting into cybersecurity specifically until like about 2011, 2012. And that was like when Anonymous was hacking all those websites and stuff like that. That's when I was like, oh, that's when I saw the David and Goliath. So I was like, this is insane. Like, let me learn a little bit more about the kind of this stuff. So yeah, okay, brilliant. So you're in university, you're studying. So what was your next move after that? Or like what were you doing in there? Was there any entrepreneur like startup little ideas that you had in college as well? Because a lot of people, a lot of founders, that they'll do something either in college or like before as well.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's a great question. I think, I've pondered about this question quite a bit, right? Like, and I would kind of say a lot of times how early somebody jumps into entrepreneurship is also, funny enough, largely defined by where they are located, the socio-economic conditions of that place, right? So, to give you an idea, back then I was in India, and of course, in India, you have an existential crisis, and what I mean by that is, if I remember, my dad's generation was the one who primarily worked in the public sector, which is government organizations and all of that. And it was just that India was starting to see privatization, more private companies and things like that, right? So by default, you're programmed to always, hunt a great job because most of the middle class, and we were middle class, uh, never really thinks about like trying something very big and audacious simply because you're so afraid that if something doesn't work, you're going to have an existential crisis. There's going to be no money. How do you feed yourself, your family, and all of that? So I feel like all the folks I was surrounded by, including my family, everybody, there the whole push was be amazing and excellent professionally, right? Be first in class, which I was like, all 12 grades, right? Make sure that, you do great research, you're scoring very high grades. So I think the push more was academic. And back in those days, there were no investors, there were no VCs. India itself did not have much of a homegrown need for technology products because this you were just looking at the very first wave of outsourcing, right? Like US companies were starting to outsource to India. There were some light development centers and all of that. So, but I will tell you the place where things started clicking for me a little bit is in the third year of my engineering. So, engineering 4 years in India. Everybody tries to apply for a foreign internship because this is really where you get 3 months. You can spend some time at a foreign university, learn stuff, meet other folks, and of course, at that age, you want to meet folks of the opposite sex as well, and
Yeah,
just take
yeah.
the word for what it is, right? So it's a big thing, and that is really where everybody tries to go ahead and get it. Now, here's the tricky part. This is not like a university to university partnership. So all you have to do is write out emails to all of these universities around the world and hope eventually someone gives you an opportunity for a paid internship. So I think I must have sent around 2 to 3 thousand messages. I stopped going to classes, and this is all I did like all day. Like find a university, find a professor, write a cover letter, go send it. Eventually, after almost 2 to 3 months of doing this, there was one professor who replied to me from Zurich. This is university called Hochschule for Technik Biet Stettler, and he responded to me basically saying, "We have a project on wireless LAN security. Do you want to do this?" And I was like, "I've never seen a wireless LAN. I don't know how a PCMCI card looks like. Never seen a laptop." But I was like, "Yeah, I'd love to do this." So he sent me back a mail saying, "Okay, can you show me some write up or some paper, around your understanding of WLANs?" And I'm like,
Oh,
"Shit."
great. Yeah, okay.
So, Chat GPT didn't exist. And,
Not,
and
yeah. So how are you doing this research? You don't have
yeah,
the LLM in front of you. What are we gonna do?
yeah. So, I probably downloaded, I don't know, 20, 30, 50 papers on WLAN security, read through all of them, and created my own mishmash summarization, sent it to him. He somehow loved it, and he said, "Hey, come over, we'll pay you for the internship." Went there, and this was an internship sponsored by Zurich Railways. And they had a very interesting use case. They basically had these access points around the whole railway track, and they were using 802.1x to do security and handoffs. And because the train moves fast, and keep in mind, this is 802.11a, very first standard. I don't know if you recall Doppler effect, which is when two waves move towards each other, or a wave and an observer, then there is a shortening of wavelength and things like that. So they wanted to test whether this has a ramification on security, which is, does a handoff fail? What happens? What doesn't? So I load a lot of original code, solved the problem for them, and then my professor handed me over a laptop as something, almost like a prize for what it's worth. And the reason I say why this was pivotal is this was the first time I kind of felt like I went in with something which was a blind opportunity. I really worked super hard to try to convert it, and it then finally worked. So I always, people say, hey, what do you take inspiration from? I generally take inspiration from events in my own life in the past where I felt things may not have worked, which is 3,000 applications and one guy responds, and to make that work. So, uh, post this, was when I kind of started with the industry and all of that stuff. And I'm just taking you to the part where, like, how entrepreneurship happened, by the way. So, but feel free to pause me in between. I get excited about this and keep
No,
going.
no, we do tangents here. You're good, and I love where we're going with this direction. This
Yeah.
is exciting. So please
Yeah.
continue.
So this is how I went into wireless LANs, and then eventually I started working with a company called Airtight Networks, which was doing Wi-Fi security in the Bay Area. And that's when I discovered the cafe latte attack, web cloaking, and all of that, and eventually spoke at all these big conferences. Interestingly, Chris, then what happened is, now as crazy as it sounds, that was the time when I wanted to do full-time cybersecurity research, but very quickly I understood, company politics, this, that, whatever. It was not possible to do all of that simply because, when you work for someone else, there's always some kind of final forcing function, a ceiling function, right? So then I said, why don't I quit, go back to my parents' home, just do security research and talk at DEF CON and Black Hat, and see if I can get an opportunity to teach at a conference, because the exchange rate of US dollars and Indian rupees was so good that I just needed to do one or two trainings to be set for the whole year.
Actually, okay. So a few questions. You're mentioning DEF CON. You're mentioning Black Hat. Did you know about? And you were in San Francisco. Had you attended the conferences prior to that, or you were just hearing from other local security minded folks that were like, "Hey, DEF CON's the mecca, man. Like, you got to get over there."
Yeah, so interestingly, my very first job, if I remember, my second job was at Cisco Systems, and I was a layer two programmer there. And that was the time when I had a lot of time to look at what attacks were around. And then I saw DEF CON and Black Hat, and I saw people speaking. And my dream was just to go visit that conference once. Because, of course, young kid sitting in India, you never think you'll be able to speak there, right? And those were all the times when you never saw an Indian speaker speak at DEF CON and Black Hat. Probably, there was nobody. Uh, so what happened was that eventually, when I went to Airtight, the founder of the company, he basically said, Vivek, here is a competitor technology called web cloaking. If you're able to break it, then you can go submit this to DEF CON, and if they accept, the company will pay all your expenses to go to DEF CON.
Oh wow, what an opportunity!
Exactly. So I spent day and night, weeks at a stretch, all weekends at the office to finally go ahead and encash on this opportunity. And then my first DEF CON was also the one I spoke at, which is, if I remember, DEF CON 17, I think. So, yeah.
Beautiful, yeah. That's The same in the same vein, like yeah, you watch the DEF CON videos and like these guys are talking about some really cool things. Their presentations are nice. They have memes in them, you know, and it's just like different than any other type of presentation you see. And then the other like big thing just about it. I mean, you mentioned professors in university. And maybe they're not the great professors. Mine's as well. Like I'm pretty sure you know the whole meme about like if you do computer science in academia in the United States, your real professor is the person on YouTube, teaching you everything, right? And you see a lot of passion when you see these like DEF CON talks and stuff like that of like the struggle, how they figured it out, and they speak with passion. I think that's a beautiful thing that a lot of industries or people like even outside of security, whatever it is, like you don't see as much like passion speakers nowadays, at least in business areas or academia, as much as I'm volunteering to give this talk and this is something I discovered. I want to share this with the community, right?
No, absolutely. And you brought up a great point, right? Cybersecurity, especially disclosing attacks, is one of those few very, very amazingly nuanced things that you typically won't get to do in your regular work for the most part, at least back in the day. The simple example, you can have a developer conference where a developer, developed a new library and he's talking about it. But unless you're like in the world of vulnerability research, for you to find a new attack mostly is on your own personal time, your own initiative, something you've probably done over the weekends. I feel like that is also a big reason why there is so much more passion, because now you aren't presenting something your company did or you did on company time, versus this is you, your identity as a security researcher in your own personal time.
Yeah. And then also like the other thing is of course is like how many other security researchers have like banged their head at the same problem or one similar, right? Because it's a very small group of people that are really looking at assembly code and being like, what the hell isn't this working? Or like reading those god awful manuals. It's like, dude, does anybody read these things? Like,
Exactly, exactly. So, I mean, I think it takes a very special kind of person to enjoy that grind, because 90% of your time in any security research just leads to dead ends. You really have to have that craziness in your mind that you are on a fact-finding mission, and you're going to be on it over and over and over again till the time you kind of reach a destination.
yeah, you're 100% right. So, okay, so we got the story of you were first speaking at DEF CON. What was that experience like when you first got there and, you're around a bunch of hackers that were also, doing the same stuff as you were doing at that time in that moment?
Yeah, I think I'll break it up into two parts, right? Like one is definitely the first realization was, hey, there are so many other people just as passionate as me, and it was just that I didn't even knew this community existed. That was one. And again, like a side note on that is it's a very, very accepting community, right? So when I was at DEF CON, nobody was seeing, whether I'm, brown or Indian or I have a different accent. Everyone, and this was way back. I mean, today, of course, the landscape is very different. But if you go back, this is 2006, 2007, right? Uh, People weren't as well traveled around the world that they would know different cultures and whatnot. But that was a very, very big, realization is like, hey, people were uniting in their love for technology and cybersecurity. And this was transcending beyond where you were from and your background and whatnot. That was one. The second, to me, I think from an entrepreneurship perspective, which eventually became very big, was the following: is I think I got the confidence that I can compete at the world level. Because look, being born and brought up in India at a very different time, you always wonder that, look, you're only looking at people from the Western world put out research, put out documentation, put out all of this crazy stuff. So you always look at it and say, can I compete? Because of course, if you want to build any company, any product, you have to compete at the world level, right? It isn't about the best browser security company in India, right? It has to be best in the world. uh, so I think that was a big realization. I came back saying, holy shit, you know what? I can be one of the best in the world. All I have to do is keep doing this, keep compounding, keep working on it. So a personal confidence boost to a major level.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Have you met anybody that has come up to you and saying like, "Wow, you like really inspired me to like do this level of research or like go into stuff that like I haven't seen another speaker, um, you know, that represents like people that are not in the Western world, right? The people I've seen this. Have you had any like interesting stories about any like fans or super fans that have spoken to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think, all it takes is for one person to show that it can be done, and then everybody knows it can be done, right? I felt what I was very happy about is, post that, of course, I started Security Tube, Pen Tester Academy, and all of that. So when I go to a lot of conferences, whether it's in India or outside of India, I think a lot of people in the early days came up to me and said, "Oh, the whole cafe latte attack, right? Like the whole world is talking about it." And this was an inspiration for me to go work on some stuff. And this is what I told people, so many, folks back in India. It's like, look, guys, you don't know, but you're already there. The only thing that you have to do is go keep doing that research and grind and find something, and you have everything you need. So that was one. And eventually, of course, when I did Security Tube Pen Tester, a lot of people ended up using, my courses and all of that. So that's always a sweet experience when people come up and say, I learned from your stuff. I eventually got a job. You won't even believe this, Chris. Still happens to me in SquareX. It's been such a long time. There are a lot of times I do potential customer calls where there are, heads of cybersecurity, and they immediately tell me like, "Hey, I've used your videos." So yeah, I mean, feel very lucky and privileged that things work out. But yeah, I was very honored when those moments happen.
Yeah, that's what a terrific like opening for a sales like a sales like meeting or whatever. Like, it's like, oh, by the way, I've seen all of your stuff before. You're great. I'm like, excellent. It's just such a warm opening. Yeah, I love that. You spent the time to help build and show and demonstrate and educate people that wanted to get in cybersecurity. Something I did when I was at university. I made like the hacking club. I gave talks, workshops, and then I brought people in from industry to give their talks and stuff like that to build it up. Right. There's an immense amount of joy that individuals get when you teach and educate and share that, ignite that passion into people. So I would like to know, what was the like a pivotal moment, or like when you realize like I got to make security tube, or like I want to make this? Like, was it an immediate push? Like, obviously this needs to be made, or was it kind of like matured as like time went on?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great question. So, I think back then, if you recall, what I was mentioning was that there was very little documentation on how to do things, and you had to kind of go through the hard way over and over again. Now, I used to love to research on diverse topics in cybersecurity, and many a times, 4 months later, when I come back, I don't remember every finer detail of what I had done. Happens to all of
Right,
us.
right, right. That happens. That still happens to me today. Yeah.
And you're like, shit, I wish I had taken some notes, I had written something down. Uh, so to me, I can tell you is like I just loved watching things and learning by looking at somebody doing. So what had happened was that when I used to work at Airtight Networks and I discovered the cafe latte attack, did all the talks and everything, many of my peers used to come to me and say, Vivek, how do you even write these codes, right? How do you write like a, Wi-Fi fuzzer? And I took a couple of classes over there for them. And I said, look, this is how you do it. So I did one batch, but then a month later, a couple of other folks came to me and they basically said, could you repeat it for us? So after some point, I got a bit fed up and I said, why don't I just record these videos? Maybe it'll help me as well recollect things later. And that is really how, when I went back to my parents' home, I said, well, what can I do? And I was like, okay, I want to do security research and speak every year at DEF CON and Black Hat. Let's start there. There's no monetary angle to it. My dad ended up paying the bills for Security Tube's S3 video buckets for the whole year.
Oh, were they expensive at the time? Like,
They
how
were,
much
they
were?
were, they were like
Okay,
every
okay, okay.
month the bill was, those days was still like $400, $600 a month.
Oh my God, that's just normal. That's expensive for anyone and anywhere. Just generally, like,
Yeah,
wow. Okay,
yeah.
that's wow. Okay.
Yeah, so because so many videos were getting consumed and all of that, and I, for some reason, which I think eventually came out to be a good decision, is I wanted to just post everything on securitytube.net on not on YouTube, because I wanted to build like a brand rather than leveraging other brands. Of course, in hindsight, had I put everything on YouTube, I may have been the biggest cybersecurity influencer today because I could have started in 2004, for what it's worth. But uh, So what happened is once I started doing that, uh, and I used to just go to all these hacker forums like hack forums and a bunch of other those back in the day and just post links to my videos and say, take a look at this, take a look at that. And very soon, what happened, Chris, is people started coming, looking at the videos, and then starting to write out comments saying, this is amazing, nobody's taught us like this. And I very quickly figured like I had a very nice knack for teaching. Again, probably, because I love the fundamentals, I love explaining things. And then one fine day, I got a mail from Belgium where there was this institute called ICT, I forget the name now, which was owned by Belgacom. It's probably the largest ISP in Belgium, right? Uh, and they had a training institute in Leuven. And they mailed me saying one of their instructors was watching my videos, but they would love it if I could just go down there and train them. So that was a big aha moment because I was like, huh. I was like, well, if I just do one or two of these trainings, I think I can do research the whole year.
Yeah. And so they were paid research. Like, you come out here, we'll pay you for everything. Was that the gist? Okay.
Yeah, we'll pay you per student. Why don't you teach people Wi-Fi security, web application security, 2 to 3 day classes?
Nice. Two to
And
3 day classes. Okay. So it's similar like a Black Hat or like DEF CON training where it's a few days. Okay.
correct. And as fairly good pay at that point, which is almost like if I remember, 500 to 700 euros per student.
Per student? How many
Per
students you
student.
got there? Like 40, 50, 20?
I think back in those days was like 17 to 20 people, but that was also
That's
good for
still
the class.
amazing. That's still amazing money.
Yeah, yeah. So the way everything compounded is it started with these, and then those students contacted me and said, "Oh, would you want to come teach at our, company? Because we have a whole batch." And very soon, what started off with like, I'll just do this for 10 days. I spent the first 1.5 years, I think, traveling dozens of countries, literally taking trainings back to back, saved up the money, put up an office in India, and that's how the company started.
That's amazing. So, oh my gosh. So, let's talk about. There's a lot to talk about. But I'd like to hear the journey of you traveling and like meeting other people that are wanting to learn your research and stuff like that. Because these are like the future hacker generations that are like going to be born doing this, right? So, do you have any interesting stories of the times that you've traveled where you got to meet people and like any like, well, this is interesting kind of moment, or like you guys do this differently here, and things that you got to experience being able to travel? Because I'll say this, as Americans, especially like American hackers, they don't travel a lot just because obviously the United States is really big, right? They'll go to DEF CON, then they'll call it a day. Well, like there's other conferences around the world. There's other things. Even like I'll always like say like CCC Camp and CCC Congress, right? There's other gatherings and other types of. There's an international community of cybersecurity people, but the United States, Americans generally just stay at the U.S. So you're probably one of the most well-traveled hackers, in the world. So, like, what are some of the things that you've seen that have been different as you've been traveling, giving different types of talks and things?
Yeah, I mean, great question. I think the timeline roughly is around, I think now 2010, 2011, right? Like was when I did most of that traveling. So I'll break up the response into like multiple parts. Like the very first thing I kind of noticed, I think across the world, was most people at that point were primarily just looking at security, uh, I would say almost academically. People had very little insight on how attackers break in. So the big thing which I kind of figured across the board is the moment I showed them how hackers would break your Wi-Fi network, your web applications, and all of that, light bulbs would just go on, and people would immediately just be like, "Hey, I never thought about this." And that was a big aha moment for me because I was like, "Okay, this is a global problem. Cybersecurity education from the offensive side." And all of this helped in me eventually building Pentester Academy and all of that, right? Because I had spoken to so many people, I understood what was missing. It was a great requirement gathering per se. So to kind of begin with, the second big thing I kind of like figured is, uh, I think most of Europe, unfortunately, even though they have some amount of English in their curriculum, I think a large part weren't probably very proficient with English so that they could immediately figure out, technical manuals and things like that. So I still remember in Belgium a lot of times when I've taken trainings and there were people in my training from France and other places. Unfortunately, they used to be completely lost. Maybe the times have changed now and things are a lot better. So I kind of figured like at some stage an internationalization and all of that stuff was kind of like important, right? The third thing, of course, was that hackers were misunderstood even back then. Because see, the folks I was teaching were not like hackers coming to DEF CON. These were, IT folks who were doubling up as cybersecurity folks because back then those teams were not different.
That's a very great explanation. Thank you for that. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense and paints a strong picture.
Yeah, yeah. Because back then, an IT admin would actually be told to pick up security, and that used to be
Right,
like
right. Because they're not
what.
going to hire a whole another person for that, right? It's like, okay, this is just in computer stuff. You do it, kind of thing, right?
Exactly, exactly. So I think you kind of could see the whole evolution where people weren't very concerned about security yet, but they were starting to see a semblance of attacks starting to happen and things like that. Forensics was very rudimentary as an example. People could just do very basic things. Incident response, again, most teams weren't even trained to do all of that. As crazy as it sounds, for most people, Metasploit breaking into a Windows machine was the craziest thing they had ever seen in their tech careers.
I mean, I still think even today people see that and they're like,
So
oh
that's
my
very
God.
weird. So yeah, I mean, I think a lot of varied experiences. Of course, more at a personal level, there were certain instances where you did see. I'm being like as frank as I can, just where you could see a little bit of like racial kind of like discrimination and all of that. So there used to be cases when I used to go into trainings, people weren't still used to seeing somebody from India stand up there and train, right? So the first 1 hour, people were a bit apprehensive, but once they knew that you know your stuff, I think generally people tend to change and appreciate you kind of a lot more. Uh, so I think faced a lot of that. I mean, in the early years, I think what I just told myself was I was like, look, they're paying anyway, so it's okay. Let's go through with it and see what kind of comes out. But yeah, I would say fantastic time, made so many friends. I think back in the day, I've spoken almost at every conference out there, right? Like Hacktivity in Budapest, BrewCon in Belgium. I think even a couple of conferences in, was it Finland or somewhere? I forget which ones, but I spoke at every conference that I could find.
Nice. And then did that also eventually integrate into like doing Black Hat and DEF CON trainings as well with the same material or different material?
Yeah, so I think, Black Hat was very difficult to break into because those days, a Black Hat trainer meant like, oh, there were probably just like 40, 50 people. So I submitted a few times, even though by then I was pretty well known for Wi-Fi security and all of that. But I think it took almost a year to break into Black Hat USA as a trainer.
You mentioned that as if it's like a long time. Like people, I'm sure in their fifth year still trying to break into it.
Yeah, yeah, those days I think like a lot fewer people are also there to be frank, but I'm sure it's a lot more competitive now. And that is really where, once that happened, I think the very first Black Hat training, I got massively positive reviews, which just compounded year over year. I think I ran those trainings for almost 7 to 8 years at Black Hat every single year, right? Like Wi-Fi, a couple of others as well in between just to mix it up. And yeah, I mean, since then, I think, Black Hat and DEF CON pretty much was like an annual event. Like my August used to get blocked. So Jeff Moss, the founder of DEF CON and Black Hat, he's an advisor investor into SquareX.
Oh,
And
beautiful.
yeah, one of the first things I told him, when we were talking about this, I said, Jeff, you don't know what big an impact you actually made in my life. Because had you not created DEF CON and Black Hat, I don't think my career in cybersecurity would have ever picked up.
That's beautiful. Yeah, he's definitely an inspiration to a lot of people. I hope to have him as a guest on the show sometimes in the studio. Probably going to be in person. I want to have a nice in person like meeting with him. That'd be beautiful. Exactly, and that's where our company, Top Cleared Recruiting, comes in. Finding the right cybersecurity talent with the necessary clearances can be a major hurdle. Did you know that it could take 8 to 15 months on average to hire somebody with a TS SEI plus full polyscope? At Top Cleared Recruiting, we have a network of 1.3 million cleared professionals, ranging from C&O developers, reverse engineers, and data scientists. Whether you're working on offensive operations or data analysis, we connect you with the elite talent you need fast. Visit topclearedrecruiting.com and let us help you to find the perfect candidate, already cleared and ready to go. Yeah, so you mentioned your company, and I think maybe we can start at least talking about it, so would like to hear what was the inspiration for creating it, because after, I'd seen a lot of like media around a SquareX, and I was like, okay, this is interesting, and then, in prep for our call, I was like, what is this product? And I was like, this is very interesting from a hacker's perspective of like, and I'll kind of give a little bit background of like, how I would like utilize virtualization, not primarily with cloud applications or with the cloud, but I ran cubes for like years, so I had like 20 virtual machines, and like if I had a browser, it would pop up and it would only be for that specific instance, and once I closed that browser, the VM would close as well. So, and then what's also great about cubes is like it rebuilds the Linux architecture for that specific VM. So even if there's malware stored on it, boom, it goes away. So utilizing virtualization for to prevent different types of attacks, I've been a big fan of it. I've been using cubes for a long time. So would love to hear more about the product. But before we get to the product, let's get to the company. What was the inspiration for creating the company? And when you were creating it, or as you were creating it, did you realize there was a market fit before you created it, or was it kind of like was it a progression?
Yeah. No, I think a great question. So I think, Chris, before that, when I founded Pentester Academy, ran it for many years, very, very good, profitable company. Eventually, I exited it, sold it to INE, and all of that happened. I think I exited around 2021, 2022, if I remember. Fairly recently, right? Around 2, 3 years back.
2021. Okay. How long did you? We should probably talk about that company first, because like, what was the inspiration for building that one, and then how did they evaluate the company for the acquisition, and then how did that acquisition process happen?
Yeah. So I think, Chris, when I was doing all of these trainings abroad, I think I very quickly figured like, look, there's only so much travel that I can do. And and frankly, in those 2 years, I think I must have freaking gained like 20 pounds, because I'm just going from airport to hotel and just eating whatever I can find at whatever time of the day. I'm at different time zones and whatnot. So at the very same time, I also, as crazy as it sounds, I'm a fairly introverted person. So because of that, I also was just wanting to sit, do my research and all of that, and not always
Yeah,
be
researcher. You want to sit at your laptop and your terminal. Yeah, it's like I have to go
exactly.
here. It's like I like this is okay, but I need some like downtime. I think you and I are the same in that respect. Like I it's hard. I always say I'm an introvert, but then if people see me out, they're like, you got to be an extrovert. So like, I think maybe I get energy from being out and inside, but like, there's a social battery where it's like, once I'm depleted, I'm like, I need to go back to my terminal. Like,
Exactly, right? You need to kind of like go back into your man cave, do your thing, and then maybe resurface when you feel like you have something interesting to share. Uh, so that is really where, I started feeling like, okay, I wanted to do something which gave me a lot more time to focus on what I wanted. So at that point, I decided, hey, why not just take all these courses, convert them into videos, and put it up on securitytube.net, and maybe charge people for a certification exam, right? And not really for the videos themselves, as crazy as that sounds now. So I did that, sent a massive email blast to everybody on securitytube.net, and that was almost like 100,000 users. And there's a crazy
wow. Okay.
story. Uh, Keep in mind, I was only offering a certification exam. The
Yeah,
video
I'm thinking about all that, like the cost for the content that you have to upload, and any time that you have to making it.
Yeah. And then I said the certification exam is for $250. Wi-Fi certification exam. Right? Fairly expensive for back in the day, maybe even now, I mean, for what it's worth. Uh, and then I send that email blast. I come back and I see PayPal has blocked my account. And I couldn't figure out why. And then I start digging deeper. And almost, if I remember, around 300 or 400 people had paid that $250. And PayPal blocked, thinking it was a scam, because all these people paid like in just the last 1 to 2 hours.
Nice. That's a comfortable level of success. You know you're doing well when PayPal blocks you because you're making too much money.
And yeah, and
legally, legally.
but here's the crazy part. Here's where it even gets more crazier, where my belief in the community went up. I emailed all of those folks and I said, I hope you understand the courseware is already available for free. You're only paying for a certification exam, and that too conducted by a no-name company, right? I mean, I literally just created the company Binary Security like a week back, right? Uh, and it was so heartwarming that people responded back saying, Vivek, we've used your stuff for the past 2 to 3 years on securitytube.net. This is the least we feel we can do to support you.
Wow, that is
Yeah.
beautiful. I'm reading a book called Superfans right now, and it just talks about how to build that culture of environment so people like will support you and help you and build your community like that. That's amazing that people that's such a beautiful story. That's such a beautiful
Yeah.
story.
And Chris, honestly, that is what built. I mean, people will ask me, were you like a very astute businessman? This I wouldn't say I was any of that back in the day, right? I was just a security researcher in love with my work who was very, very generous in putting his work out there, sharing it with everybody, getting every opportunity to help someone, give out free videos. And what hit me back then is, what? All the right people in the community understand how much work that takes and are willing to support you back. So, yeah, that is really how the company started getting built. And even when I did Pentester Academy, we were the first in the whole industry, right? Back then, OffSec and all of these guys were charging thousands of dollars. SANS, of course, would charge your whole house. You had to take like a second mortgage to do like a SANS course. Uh, but we kept it down at just $39 a month and basically said, look, all you can eat, come and try this out. And that just grew the company like anything. And I was so happy because I felt I was asking for something which was affordable while being able to build a great business, but educating so many people. So I think at scale, we had, tens of thousands of customers from, I don't even remember now, 170, 180 countries, at scale, Fortune 500, government agencies, everybody buying from Pentester Academy. I ran it for a good 7, 8 years, I think almost like 10 years. And I think the time I decided, Chris, that I wanted to exit it, I felt I had really, really enjoyed like the 10 to 12 years as a teacher, educator. But as the company was growing bigger and bigger, I was spending more and more time running the company rather than doing what I enjoyed, which is groundbreaking research. So that was one. The second thing is, I say this to some of the folks who worked with me at Pentester and now at SquareX is I started feeling like, almost like a teacher in a Shaolin temple teaching you martial arts, but never going to war himself.
Oh, yeah, that's a great analogy. Okay.
So I was looking at the security industry and saying so many unsolved problems. Why is someone not building this product? Why is someone not doing this? But then all I could do was verbalize that in a video, backtrack, and again just go back to teaching. So I'm trying to also segue to like the SquareX part is the one big thing which hit me at that point is initial access, was happening via the web browser almost for all enterprise users, right? Users click on a spear phishing link, download a malicious extension or a bad, malicious file, something bad happens. And I started looking at existing security solutions and I felt all of them were fairly broken. And that was the time when, I also felt, okay, you know what, I've done enough as an educator. And now I was waking up every morning feeling more excited about wanting to build a security product, not just education. And always being a person who's super focused on one thing, I know you can't do two things and be great at them. So by then, Chris, we were already getting acquisition offers every month, to be honest, for the last like
Really? So they're all
yeah.
contacting you saying like, yeah, we
Yeah.
need to acquire you guys, buy you guys. Okay. And then
Yeah. Yeah.
just a question, like what kind of companies are asking for the acquisition and what's the value add for them?
Yeah. So I think what was happening is cybersecurity, and this was almost, 2020 now. Cybersecurity had already gone mainstream. People were talking about it. There were, hacks, attacks. So all the large education companies, online education companies were looking at beefing up their cybersecurity offering. Now, what Pentester Academy had done, which was groundbreaking, was we had created the industry's first browser-based lab. So you could have any infrastructure, but all the labs were visible and playable directly in the browser. Now everybody does it, right? Everybody shows Kali in the browser and all of that stuff. But we were the first in the whole industry to build this technology.
That's amazing. I remember seeing like my first academic course where there was the browser integration. I'm like, this is amazing. So you guys were the trailblazers for that.
Yeah, and you won't believe, like, pick up every single company with just cybersecurity training. All their guys were subscribers to Pentester Academy and were poking into our labs just to check how we built it.
Interesting.
Right?
That's good. That
Won't
means
take
you're
names now.
successful. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm out of that industry, so I won't take names. But anyway, so I think what happened, Chris, is that was the time when I felt like, okay, this is good. And among all the potential acquirers, I felt INE, which was run by Providence Equity, one of the largest PE funds in the US. I met with the CEO. I really liked the guy, Richard McLean. And then I said, hey, if we had to have a good home, this would be the place. Primarily, they were buying us for the lab technology because I think they already had like hundreds of courses across networking, IT, and whatnot. But they did not have a lab platform capable of creating any kind of lab environment, which we had.
Interesting. Did they also purchase like the emailing list and your user list as well when that acquisition
Yeah,
happened,
yeah.
or was that
It
not
was,
as?
it was pretty much lock, stock, and barrel, everything. The crazy part of the acquisition is the whole thing happened over Zoom because this was during COVID. So I never met the acquirers face to face. I still haven't met any of them, by the way.
That's crazy. There's a whole like we could talk about like social engineering types of attacks that could be around those two even. Actually, so first thing is it's very interesting that you were traveling and then you got burnout and then you're like, I got to do something else, and then you decided to build a company. I don't know if you know Alex Hermosi. He's like this like I think he's like a bigger, buffer American guy, and he did his exact path was the same with like gyms. So quick this entrepreneur podcast. We'll talk a little bit about entrepreneur stories. He had his book $100 million offer. I read it. It was interesting. It was good. It's good. But he talks about like how he would travel to different. He had a gym. He built it up, and he used like marketing, like Facebook marketing, Instagram marketing, to like be able to increase the revenue to like over $200,000 in revenue for these gyms that only had like maybe 40,000, 50,000 annually. So he was able to build out these gyms, and all the gyms across the US, all the smaller gyms said like, come, please teach us how to do it. So we'd fly. Eventually he was like, he never went home. He was always just traveling, and he had to hire like 2-3 other people to help him travel to do this. And then at one point he's like, I don't want to go anymore. I will pay somebody just to not go and stuff like that. So then he's like, the person on the phone was like, okay, well, just teach me how to do it. And then he's like from your home or whatever. And he's like, okay, like, how much would that be? He's like, I don't know, like $1,000, whatever it is. And he's like, okay, sure. And he's like, that was easy. And then the next person called, he's like, $2,000, like, sure. He's like, that was easy. He was doing this for a little while, but then he eventually realized he can create a conference. So he had all of the people come to him, and then he charged them like a high ticket item, like I think it was like $10,000, $20,000 for like a weekend, because they knew at the end of it, the value of their business would be like $200,000 of recurring revenue. So it made sense for that business model. But it's very interesting how you shifted being so successful after giving all these trainings to then create an academic platform to then be able to deliver not just the people that you could physically go to by traveling, but but everyone in the world. It was a brilliant story.
Well, that's a great story. I mean, I'll definitely check him out. And you brought up a great point, right? Like, what tends to happen is, as an entrepreneur, once you identify a small localized problem, then you ask yourself, is it possible to scale the solution? And if you think about it, the in-person trainings, or in his case, going visiting every single gym, was that small localized problem you realized that you can solve really, really well. And then the big question is, could you scale that, right? Which was a conference in his case. For me, the most natural thing was like, hey, online training. And then from there, you kind of figure out like, hey, kind of like what's next in that journey. But yeah, absolutely.
That's interesting. So for you, next in that journey was building up the Pentester Academy, and then being able to have that acquisition. So I researched like how different types of acquisitions happen and stuff like that and what they value. So if you're able to, you probably can't give numbers, it's fine. But like, what was the value that they were like looking for, and then what kind of multiples do these types of acquisitions? Because you got a lot of offers. So like, what kind of like acquisition ranges were they, and what kind of multiples were they based off of, or like what was like the multiple range?
Yeah. So you brought up a great question, Chris. So generally, I think if you're selling a company for pure revenue multiples, you'll have to be lucky to get a good deal. Because what tends to happen is, if you get into that discussion with a potential acquirer, I mean, he will have a whole team to sit down, dissect your revenue, call 70% of it bad revenue, good revenue, and kind of cut you down over there. So I think the best way to sell a company is to kind of sell it based upon the intellectual property and what the acquirer can get out of it in the next 3 to 4 years.
Okay.
And then be able to build a little bit of FOMO around the fact that there are other people available to buy. Because I always say is like, just like investments, right? A lot of times companies end up raising money at some ridiculous valuation, and you'll have like a large amount of social media laugh at it and say, this is so stupid. The investors ended up paying so much,
Yeah.
right? But what most people don't realize is in almost all private markets, valuation is in the eyes of the beholder. So it's what he values having you versus what you feel you should probably get if you put in like 4 years or 5 years of your profit multiplied. And what I mean by that is generally when you talk to an acquirer, you should talk to him more about like, hey, if you guys had this technology, you're going to be able to increase your revenue like 10x with your existing customers over the next 3 to 4 years. And this is the exact same thing anyone who buys us can do, and here are other four people,
Oh.
right?
Okay.
So my perspective would be you should actually pay me some reasonable value in that neighborhood because this is really what you're going to make off me. So question is not how valuable am I to me? And that is the wrong way because today I could say my revenue is X. Oh, you know what? If somebody paid me like 8x or 10x, that's like 8 years of, me having to go work out there. So the reverse is much better, which is with this intellectual property, an acquirer could get this, and that is what I will take. Uh, and I feel if you are able to play that narrative, you will get a much better outcome versus an 8x 10x on EBITDA. EBITDA is like the worst. If somebody talks to you and
Okay.
says,
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you.
I think you should either run or you're too desperate, which means you should immediately sell. And what I mean by that is the only guys who will accept an EBITDA multiple are the desperate ones, which actually means you should sell, get out, build another business.
Wow. Okay. This you're dropping so much information and knowledge on me. This is terrific. Like I haven't had these types of talks before.
Yeah, and Chris, just to add one more thing, right? Cybersecurity, because again, we're talking a little bit more nuanced about cybersecurity, is very different. There are companies with $2 to $3 million in revenue getting acquired for 650, 700 million, right? Product companies, and I'm not talking education. Why? So here's the key insight, right over there. There are around 15 to 16 publicly traded cybersecurity companies like CrowdStrike, SentinelOne, Zscaler, Palo Alto, right?
Very
And
few.
these guys have massive distribution, right? They have tens of thousands of customers worldwide, hundreds of salespeople running on the ground. Now, these companies don't view a new startup as a competitor because they have like 20 lines of products, which if a startup had to build, it's also going to take 15 to 20 years. So all they are doing now is looking at startups which have unique intellectual property which can increase the money they can make off their 10,000 customers via distributing better.
I see. So they have the distribution network already. They just want to see like, can this product I add into our main suite? Will they pay an extra whatever that number is, and then you multiply by the number of customers as well as the potential new customers that would be coming in. Is that accurate?
Exactly, exactly. So that's why most cybersecurity startups are lapped up, basically in the Series A to Series B round. Uh, and the simple reason is point products in cybersecurity now are very, very hard to kind of sustain over a long period because almost all customers are tired of having 10 different security products and then figuring out integration and all of that, right? You speak to an average CISO, The only security product he will buy as a point solution is a bleeding edge one the big guys don't give yet. So, as a simple example, the day browser security is offered by every single large company, hopefully by then we are so big that we can compete, or we are already sold to one of them, or you're doomed to die. Because doesn't matter if you're best in class, most customers will prefer an integration or an integrated product with multiple things rather than one.
That's so interesting. So, and this is the entire landscape of cybersecurity products, right? This is not just specifically like one segment of it, right?
Exactly. Entire landscape. And that is really where you see M&A happen pretty much like every single month. Now, if you understand this nuance, then when you're building a cybersecurity product, you'll try to build something at the bleeding edge. You'll try to make sure you can get to product market fit as fast as possible,
Yeah.
get poster child logos, and then decide whether this looks like having the ability to build a company in its own right and become really big, or is this a candidate for a great acquisition?
This is amazing. So I'd love to hear like and understand like where you learned this because there's like technical books where we can dive into, but this is like really, really deep like business understanding and stuff like this, right? So let's say some of our listeners, they've been working on 0 day research and then they look up at this podcast and be like, whoa, that makes sense. I want to build a product or something to help whatever the case is. How could they get some of this information of like how to learn more about these business insights and these case studies of like what's going on in the world relative to the cybersecurity industry?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the things I'd first say is very interestingly, I feel almost every security researcher has the capability to build a great company, and I'll tell you why, and then I'll give an answer to the second part, right? I think if you look at security research, you spend so much time trying to solve a narrow problem where 90% is wasted in just things failing, right? And if you're a good researcher, eventually you come out at the top. You're solving a problem and doing all of that. Like a company building process is exactly the same, right? You're trying to build something, get to product market fit, figuring out if this is finally going to work for a customer. So the same relentless ability to see yourself through 90% failure time, 5%, 10% success time is the exact DNA you require to build a product. Now, the second thing is if you are building in cybersecurity, the only thing you can build in is a bleeding edge problem, which means you have to have a security researcher mentality. Or else, how do you uncover a bleeding edge problem? How do you look at how to solve it? Right? Because if there's already something existing, you're probably just going to build a Me Too product for what it's worth, right? Now coming, Chris, to the second part, most of what I've learned is actually interestingly by reading about M&A like crazy, which is
Where do we read about MMA? Where can we get
so
this information?
on TechCrunch is a great place to kind of like read about all the great M&A in cybersecurity. There are a couple of other websites I forget top of mind, but I'll send you some links and maybe you can like post it. So once I get to read, I immediately see, okay, this company was just formed like 3 years back, right? What was so unique about it? Then I start reading more about their product services and figure out like, okay, this seems to be a bleeding edge problem. But what hits me was like, hey, this is so nuanced. Like, why would someone like go about wanting to solve this? And then you slowly start to realize is the bigger companies only want companies which are solving these new age nuanced problems. As a simple example, so many AI security companies are getting picked up, right? And some of them just do very basic tests on prompt injection and things like that. And you'll be like, okay, this is simple, or why is this so big? What most people forget is a large company would rather buy than build because build would mean getting a product manager, getting a VP engineering, getting the whole team, making sure they have all the right people, the right product roadmap, and hoping everybody executes in 2 years. So that is one. The second is talk to exited founders. I think I did this all through, especially after I exited, because I figured like they'll give you the best insights. Because every exited founder has kind of grown his wisdom teeth when it comes to how to get a company acquired, because you've had that experience. And everyone has a different story, right? I sold an education company. I've spoken to people who sold product companies, service companies, and you get a lot of that insight. That is true. The third thing is I would almost relentlessly say follow, like pick the top 15 public market companies and follow the CEOs on LinkedIn. 99% of the times, every large company CEO, the PR department loves for them to talk about bleeding edge things because they want to show thought leadership. What tends to happen, Chris, is in a way they give away what is important to them. So you pick 15 of them, put it together, you almost see a trend on what all the big companies are thinking about. And in a way, you can even surgically figure out what kind of companies to build around it if you want to literally curve fit it to what you feel people are going to kind of like need. I mean, again, nothing can be super prescriptive, but as close to it as it can get.
Wow, that's amazing. That's very interesting. So the question I have is like, let's say you're looking for a founder that has had an exit. How do you determine if they've had I don't know how to say this in the best manner, but if the exit that they had was like more or less like a very high level of success for them versus like, damn, I just need to sell this company because like I'm freaking tired of it and they just want it out and it wasn't as fruitful as it could be. How do you determine which people that founders that had made these different types of
Great question.
exits?
Great question. Yeah. So actually, I'll give you a very kind of like contrary thought here. I actually feel like it doesn't matter, and I'll tell you why, right?
Okay.
You have to talk to both because the guys who failed will tell you the biggest mistakes they made. So I've spoken to people and they said, Vivek, we screwed up on the timing. The market was hot, everybody was getting acquired, we got acquisition offers, but we said, you know what, let's hold off. We'll probably sell for 5x more.
Yeah.
And then the whole market got consolidated. Palo Alto, Zscaler, everybody had that product. And here we were trying to convince people why they should buy us, right? So I would actually say, till the time you see that the founder's company has been bought out, there is always like some key learning in there. So I can tell you, I met a couple of really interesting folks and they told me, Vivek, the first thing you need to do as soon as you have a product is go talk to the corp dev department of all of these companies so that they should know you exist. So corp dev is a specific function in larger companies responsible for M&A. They are the guys who will go talk, yeah, try to buy your company. Corporate development is what they call it, corp dev as a short. And incredibly, that was great advice because now every single corp dev in all the top companies knows who SquareX is. Why? Because what happens is the day somebody says we want to do a market consolidation exercise, right? Then there should be one person on the corp dev team who ends up and says, hey, by the way, we should call SquareX to the table as well and see what they're doing. Looks like they're also in the same space.
Oh, interesting. And then
And
they call you guys, and then I suspect like you're in the conversation.
exactly, because I mean, of course, they'll evaluate like 15 companies and decide what's best. But the worst thing is, you don't want to die because of obscurity, right? Because the worst thing is no one knows about you. But here's the best part: you're thinking, why would a corporate department even talk to me? You're forgetting that's their job. Their job is to identify the whole landscape. Their job is not to select, right? They will identify the whole landscape, get 15 companies, go to the product team and say, here are 15 companies, you go evaluate.
Interesting. So how did you get the initial conversation with corporate dev team? Yeah.
The best way is actually to build a great board of advisors. So the moment you get all of these other founders who are also exited, you can basically go ask them, hey, do you know the corp dev in in this company versus that company? And almost someone will be able to find a connection.
You need to write a book on networking, man. This is incredible. Like you're like everything that you're doing in terms of like the connections that you're making is highly strategic to the point of like, yes, I'm going to build my advisory board who have probably already had exits or know people that have exited from a larger corporation to be able to even know the corp dev. So that way, while we're building the company, you can immediately integrate it into them. So they're already looking at acquisitions upon starting and building the company. That is freaking amazing.
And Chris, just to add to that, you know what also happens when a company will research you to buy you, they will go to your About Us page, look at the list of advisors. If they know someone they trust, that's the first call they're going to make. I can tell you, one of my very good friends, another founder, he just messaged me basically saying that, hey, a very large public market company is looking at maybe buying us, because they spoke to the CEO, spoke to one of our advisors and asked about us. It's a big trust game. People think, a buying of a company is something where, you just find someone and go buy. No, people buy companies they're okay trusting, and that'll only happen depending on who's involved with your company.
Yeah, that's true. That's super interesting. This is such a unique and strong information, like a lot of information. Because I'd taken like Y Combinator Startup School, and just it's like a online platform where you can education platform where it talks about building a product, things like this. But they don't ever talk about this. They don't ever talk about like how to build the advisory board or the board, like a group of people and what to look for.
Yeah, I'll tell you why. I'll tell you
Yeah,
why.
please. Yeah.
And I know a lot of investors would hate me for this, right? What tends to happen is most investors, right, would only want you to kind of build $1 billion company because in their mind, they want those three companies out of 50 to return the fund.
Right. They don't want the acquisition. They prefer you just to be the unicorn. Is that it?
Exactly, because they feel like at some point you may be an interesting acquisition. But imagine if they told first time founders that, hey, you should immediately start talking here, talking there. Now, what they always worry about is even if there is an interesting enough offer, many first time founders or even second time ones may immediately go take it. So that is counterproductive to their own business model. Their business model
That's
is
yeah,
outlier.
that's so interesting. Yeah, so they're trying to produce unicorns while you just might want to be a serial entrepreneur where you create, sell, and still you're building value in the market, but it's not the
Exactly.
value that they want to invest in because they would rather have somebody like 50x, 100x, whatever to make their investments work.
Exactly. So in their business model, eight out of, or rather nine out of 10 companies are bound to fail. That's their business model. But you somehow have to make your one of one succeed, right? And I honestly say this, and again, very, very, I would say something which can also get me in trouble is people tell all the time like, oh, it's okay to fail, it's okay to fail. If you've been at a company for 5 to 7 years and you fail, that is a massive emotional, physical toll. It's not something you're going to, just immediately get up from, start another big company. Happens. Most of the time doesn't happen. I can tell you so many founders I know. So the way I like to instead talk to investors is I basically tell them, look, I'm going to grow this company to as big as it can become, but you need to trust my judgment that at the right time, if it makes sense for us to raise more money, go become bigger, or is it the right time for us to sell? And if you can't trust my judgment on that, you shouldn't actually invest. You are the founder, you are on the front lines. You are the best person to take a judgment call on whether something should be sold or continue to run.
That's the interesting thing because I at least like if you're talking to like Y Combinator or whatever, like anybody at YC or these other types of like investment firms, and these founders are fresh new kids, we're like right out of college. They're like, I don't a lot of times, right? They're like, I don't know what's best for me. Like you obviously know what's best for me. You guys have the money, but there's an entire different game that they're playing because they want you to unicorn. They're not even considering anything else.
Exactly. And I can tell you this is causing a massive depletion of a lot of people who could have great success. And what I mean by that is keep in mind for an average individual, even selling a company for single digit $1 million completely changes his life.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah. Selling a company, period, changes an individual's life, right? I mean,
right,
like regardless for the amount, like yeah. Please.
exactly. And I feel this is something unfortunately a lot of founders tend to miss. And what tends to happen is this is what I call like a lot of investors create this wrong narrative around like the ideal founder, right? So the ideal founder persona is someone who is just executing, only wants to build a $10 billion company which will publicly list someday. And anything less than that, you know what? You are not, kind of like ambitious enough. And then instead of you trying to build a great business and exit shareholders, it becomes about, are you ambitious enough compared to other founders? So anyway, I mean, I could go on and on about this. This is very close to my heart because I've seen so many great founders, unfortunately, go down to zero and negative just because of not really understanding, how markets work and how economics works.
This is really interesting. Have you ever considered or thought like maybe that you would create your own fund to help support founders even if it's just to the point of them being acquired, or even like an education thing to teach, whether it be a book or some type of thing to say like, hey, listen, like just because your investors or these bigger VC firms want you to be a unicorn, you're still successful if you can get to this level and like demonstrate that. Because this is like brand new information to me. Maybe there's other people talking about this. I have not heard any of this because
not
I've
too
just all been in the YC, or I'll say VC suck of like unicorn everything kind of thing.
I think you brought up a great point. So, what I tell founders is you should be very straightforward to your investors and not spend time trying to impress them. See, what happens is, as you said, most of these founders are coming right out of college. So, who were they trying to impress in college? Their peers and their professors. Now they just come out, somebody's put money in them. Who are they trying to impress? The guys who put money in them. So we all have a tendency of always wanting to impress somebody. And I think once you can come out of it and basically say, let's be practical and pragmatic. So I would actually say take money, but set correct expectations. And what tends to happen is to begin with, the investors themselves will respect you more because they know this guy is actually thinking, he has his own thesis and we should only invest if we believe in this thesis. Now, the second thing, Chris, what also kind of brought up is, unfortunately, I actually feel like people are using the same model across all verticals. So YC is investing in companies across every possible vertical in tech and non-tech. So they can only have one gospel, right? The one you're hearing in startup school and everything, and that's about big build companies, da da da, build an Airbnb and whatnot. The truth is, unless you have very nuanced information of a vertical like cybersecurity, you really don't even know what to do then. Because here you are, starry-eyed, thinking, I'm just going to keep building something which will go to, $10 billion one day. How many companies in the history of cybersecurity can you name which have gone over $10 billion in market cap? Like 13 or 14? And honestly, here's the reverse thing. I'm not trying to say don't be ambitious. I'm not trying to say don't try to build something big.
No, you're not. You're
People
saying be
misunderstand.
realistic and not just think that the unicorn is the way, right?
Exactly. So yeah.
All right, this is great information. I know that the listeners of that are here for the entrepreneur like lessons are gonna love it. Let's shift over directions and go and talk more about your company, right? So we'd love to hear more about what you guys are doing, for the people that don't know about your guys' product and your company values, and then go into, where do you guys want to take it and what's going on there.
Yeah. So, SquareX was something I said, like I started because I was looking at browser as initial access. So what we are building is a browser native security product, which deploys as a browser extension pretty much across any browser. And once it is installed, it goes ahead and detects client-side web attacks, mitigates it, does browser file isolation, content disarming, and eventually allows you to threat hunt all these attacks like enterprise-wide. I mean, in a nutshell, that's kind of like a 1 minute pitch on the product. Now, the key thing when I kind of started the company, I felt like, look, the browser has become the new endpoint, right? You're spending almost 90% of time in the browser. Think of it, Chris, right now on Riverside, we are literally shooting this on the browser, right?
Right? Everything.
Yeah, everything. And I think, if you look at younger people, early 20s, they all exclusively live in the browser. They barely install any local applications anymore, right? Your streaming media, gaming, everything happens in the browser. And that is really where the company is built on the thesis that if the browser is the new endpoint, then just like 15 years back, you needed a CrowdStrike or an endpoint security tool which runs on the host. Now you need a browser detection response tool which actually runs in the browser. And as we move forward, if we believe in the thesis of a browser first, internet first world, then this would make sense because you're sitting on the gateway device, which 15 years back was your computer, today is your browser. So I think, we've been doing pretty well. Overall, now starting to deploy, proof of concepts and slowly closing customer accounts in some of the largest plants in America, that you can imagine. We have people scattered over Singapore, US, India. We just hired our, chief revenue officer, David Smith, based out of the US. So yeah, I think so. The company is compounding. The last 2 years have been amazing. 16 to 18 months close to building the product itself. And now we are happy to go to market and start to see like how customers are responding.
Is the so when you guys are integrating this into existing enterprises, are you guys starting with the pilots, or are you guys able to get paying customers immediately? What
Yeah,
does that look like from a business
great
perspective?
question. So I think, if you visualize security products, I would kind of say one is inline and the other, I mean, lack of a better word, is I would kind of say like, out of line. And what I mean by that is any security product which is in the data flow of a user's day-to-day working. So let's say a firewall, let's say a browser security product like us. There is a very high bar for adoption. Why? Because if we do something wrong, productivity gets hacked, right? Like people are not able to finish their work and all of that. So in a product like this, you will almost inevitably always have a proof of concept phase. Uh, People will need to get a sense of comfort that your product is easy to deploy, does not change user behavior, does not cause a nuisance, does not slow the computer down, all of that, like, check boxes that you have to take. Uh, Post that, people will be more okay to kind of like, slowly start to deploy this in the whole organization. Now, in cybersecurity, I mean, we are an absolutely brand new category. I guess we are creating a new category called browser direction response. There's no one in that. I mean, because we literally coined the name browser direction response. Uh, we go in, primarily discuss use cases. I primarily talk to CISOs and say, what attacks have you seen? And then we tell them, look, give us a day. We'll create a policy and you'll actually see this attack gets blocked. And then when we show it to them, there is an aha moment. So these discussions typically take like a month, month and a half. After that, the POC takes another month to 2 months.
And for a question for the 1 month for the POC that's there, is it like we're deploying across every single workstation, or is it like we'll do like a subset of like these
Yeah, great question.
devices to?
So generally, what I've seen is happens in three phases. Phase one is when it's only deployed on the security team's devices for them to test. Phase two is when they roll it out on, let's say, 50 to 100 users across departments. And then once that is okay, it moves towards purchase. And post purchase typically would be, rolling out to everybody.
Got it. And then the demonstration that you guys showed them, is it kind of like a pen test, or like a red team, like an adversarial type of attack, where it's like, okay, now we're going to show you like your current system or computer, or whatever the case is, versus like this is with our product.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So the big question that you have to ask yourself is, does your product have a right to live? Right? Like what is the reason somebody should use you? And what we did was we felt like client-side web security was being solved by SASE, SSE, secure web gateways. And this is all the big guys, Palo Alto, Zscaler, Netscope, whatnot. And when I was starting the company, I felt like these products unfortunately cannot solve these problems because, when they started, browsers were just rendering engines. Today, browser are application platforms. And that is really where, Chris, what I did is I went back to my attacker roots. And the team and I, we did actually a DEF CON main stage talk, which said breaking secure web gateways for fun and profit. And where we showed
Perfect
like,
title.
yeah, where we showed like 20 plus architectural vulnerabilities which can't be fixed. So generally, I do an opening call. I tell people to go to a site called scan.browser.security, which we own. And I tell them, if you're on your security product, run a test, see your exposure. If that worries you, come talk to us. We'll explain why. And if this is still something that you want to fix, happy to help you. And that way, I think it's almost like, as you said, an automated browser pen test of their exposure to client-side web attacks, while all their existing security products are turned on their own infrastructure. I mean, what better way to prove that there is a big gap in your security?
Especially if you're able to just have them go to a website and it executes immediately, instead of like a back and forth of like, hey, let's set up a time where I can show you kind of thing. It's just like,
Yeah.
boom, it's instantaneous, and then they're able to see it. And I guess also you probably maybe you even get some information about like who's looking at the website as well, so you can even have your sales team contact them directly.
Yes, that happens all the time. And one of the things we did, which is a big, big, big departure from what the industry follows, is we've put up dozens of videos of product demos solving attacks on our website. Trust me, no one does it. Everybody hides it. You need one call, two call, three calls before you finally get to see what the product actually was. And my perspective is, look, I'm a security guy, 25 years. Show me the real thing. Show me what it is. I'm smart enough to figure it out. I'm smart enough to decide if I want to talk to you. So we want to appeal to, feeling that people who contact us, you're smart enough to decide versus take you through, three sales calls, take your requirement and then show you what we have.
That's beautiful. Yeah. I've seen a lot of companies' websites and it's like they have the buzzwords and you're like, what the hell do they even do? Like, let me try, I want to see a demo. I want to see something. It's like, great, schedule a consultation. I was like,
Exactly.
of course, I'm not a corporate company to be able to purchase things anyways, but it's an interesting, different type of approach when you're looking at enterprise to be able to show them immediately. It's beautiful.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. I did cut you off. You said the pilots are display it goes out in three phases. The first one, small micro group, and the second one's like a bigger group. And then what was the following up with
Yeah.
the
Generally, Chris, the third one is like when people just say we want to purchase and we want to move ahead. So in very, very rare cases, I think there's a pre-phase where what happens is we set up the product on an AWS workspace and they go test it even before they test it on their own company environment. That sometimes happens. I think we try to avoid it because what tends to happen is, end of the day, when you start to deploy on your own network, you get to see a lot more rich data versus on a test network.
So I guess from the technical standpoint, like, does this work across all browsers or
Yeah, all browsers, Chrome, Edge, Firefox, Safari, any Chromium browser.
any Chromium? So that includes Android. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So I think on mobile devices, what tends to happen is Chrome itself goes ahead and disables extensions, but any Chromium-based browser app on Android can be deployed with our browser extension.
Okay. So it's a browser extension that your guess is a product. Is that correct?
Correct. I mean, in the background, there's a lot of stuff happening in the SaaS service and everything. But we wanted to make it easy because, end of the day, you don't want a massive change management, give people.
Gotta give them a whole new browser.
Yeah. That does not work. That does not. I mean, we've talked to so many people where they are like, hey, this is just too heavy duty for us to roll out.
Yeah.
If you had given us like a new browser. Yeah.
Yeah, no. I'm completely joking. This is too uncomfortable for people to change, right? Okay. From a security perspective, is there any concerns that you guys have, or like how handling any types of like browser escapes or like a extension types of attacks?
Yeah. So I think the only thing everybody will have to worry about, of course, is any 0 day in the Chromium source code itself, right? Like that, unfortunately, nobody can go ahead and patch again simply because, it is at the lowest levels of the application itself. Now, the good news is, apart from that, I think, browser extensions are siloed out in a very interesting way, which is scripts running on pages can't really talk to browser extensions directly. And that's the whole sandbox model that Chrome has created. So barring any 0 days in the sandboxing itself, architecturally these are siloed out environments. So very difficult to go ahead and break into a browser extension using something like this. Uh, Apart from that, I actually also would say that once a browser extension is deployed via group policy in a company, users cannot really disable it, stop it, and do any of those because the browsers get converted to managed browsers. So that is the layer of security, that you kind of have, just like when you deploy an EDR or an XDR, via a, managed device.
Nice. And does it let you know in live time or later even if you had like clicked on something that was malicious? Does it let you know in the browser, or does it say like, hey,
Yeah.
this wasn't good?
Yeah. So we immediately go about blocking it, and then of course the admins in the admin terminal can go about looking at the whole event. We have attack graphs, so they can understand every single thing that which ended up happening. So we do all of that in a very, very granular way. And depending on what kind of policy the enterprise is set, we can also throw up an educational message telling them what happened, or just point blank, just block it and say, hey, this site violated some policy.
Okay. And then do you also collect like the telemetry and information about like if like the things that are blocked to be able to like build like a threat detection model for, or not a model, but like saying like, well, we're noticing a pattern here kind of thing. Uh, Links and things go into specific URLs or whatever the case is.
Yeah, I think that's largely part of our threat detection, algorithms. So once we discover something is kind of like bad, we model it, we automatically pick up the IOCs, and then we go ahead and push out like auto remediation across the enterprise. Regarding using the customer's data, I think it's up to them. Most of them opt out and they don't want us to use any of their attack data to, train our own models or to use it across tenants. And that is something we respect. And cases where they say that they anonymously want to go about sharing all of this threat intel, we go about using it, posting a blog, things like that.
Okay, very cool. And then you said you push it back to the enterprise as well. So like if you have the IOCs and stuff like that. So do you have integrations with existing types of tools where it's like we found this type of thing and then it could integrate to I don't know, firewall or something else that could potentially like help its other types of defenses?
Yeah. So Chris, primarily the integration most people want is, back to their SIM or back to data lakes of
Okay.
EDRs and all of
Okay,
that.
right. Okay, yeah.
And that's the way most people want to explore. But you're right, in some cases, people want us to hit a webhook, or go about like creating a case in ServiceNow or, informing the person and his manager that, there was like this trigger event which ended up happening. So I think what we generally do is on a per customer basis, we ask them what integrations are required. Until the time, whatever you want us to integrate with has a simple API, generally takes us a day to 2 days. We do it because we know that, after some point, there's only so many integrations in the world that people would want. So there is a good convergence and it's not that you'll keep on building more and more integrations. So
Got it. Because I suspect like businesses companies can get into that loop of like, well, this one client wants this integration, now we have to build that, and this other one wants that, we have to build that out, and they can get into this like loop of like you're building all these integrations for one-off use cases as you're getting clients, and it's just not feasible to continue to do so.
yeah. Generally, if we feel that is not something we can repeatably use across multiple clients, like a very esoteric service nobody's ever heard of, then we try to put it on a roadmap or we try to get some commitment. So if let's say we are running a POC and the client says, "Oh, we need this integration," and my question would be, "Well, if I get you this, are you buying?"
Yeah, of course, yeah, right.
Right? Because if you aren't, like, okay, this is just a wish list then. But if you are, and you can, put your money where your mouth is, okay, we'll just build it out in the next 2 days. So I think very important as an early stage company and entrepreneur to differentiate between a wish list and a must have.
Yes. Please go into this.
Yeah, and I actually feel what tends to happen is people will say, hey, in the early stages, take a design partner, take a couple of design partners, work with them, understand what customers need. I actually feel like if you choose the wrong ones, they can lead you onto a completely different path. Also, what tends to happen is you have to be very careful if a feature request aligns with the long-term vision of your product. So I can give you one example, right? There was this. I mean, even if I tell you the space, you will know who it is. So I'll because all NDAs. This ginormous American company, publicly listed, they came to us and they basically said, "Oh, you know what? Like, if you detect that there is a malicious file getting downloaded, is it possible for you to open this up like in a sandbox in the admin terminal?" And what I basically said is, I said, look, we have a disposable file viewer. You can go look at it. They were like, no, we want to do malware analysis. I said, okay, what tools do you need? Here are the tools we need. And I was like, look, what I can do is we can pre-install it there and then you do the analysis. And they were like, no. Can you give us an automated analysis report?
I want you to build a whole other product.
Exactly. So, and even though this was like one of the first people that we were talking to, right? And all our investors knew, uh, I had to put my foot down and I basically said, look, guys, what you're basically telling us to then build is a malware analysis product.
Yeah.
And there are many of them. I don't even think we want to compete in that space. So I kind of went back and said, I'm happy to integrate with an existing product if you want, which is we send the files to them and we send you over to them and you figure. But they were adamant, did not work out. Now, on the contrary, there are so many cases where when we speak to customers and they say, could you build this? Could you build that? If it's POC stages, my first question is, will you buy? If I feel it's aligned with the
Right.
conversation. After sale, if they ask for something, I'll ask them what problem do they really want to solve. And the big reason is many a times understanding that maybe the product is already capable of doing it and they just haven't explored the product enough. So what I
Or
try
there's an existing solution already out there that they just haven't even thought
exactly,
about, right? Yeah, that's
exactly,
brilliant. So
exactly.
you bring it around because you don't want to spend so much development time on something where it's like, did you guys even look at the market? Like,
And
that's already out
the,
there.
and the truth is, customers aren't really asking you for a new feature when they ask you for a new feature. They are trying to solve an unsolved problem. And I think I try my best to get to what that unsolved problem is. And I'm like, okay, were you expecting to solve with this feature? And when they come up with that, I look at it and say, well, no, this is already solvable. Just apply this policy. And they're like, oh, is it? We didn't know. And gives me two intel. One is, of course, that, okay, there's a product education problem. You're a new category. You have to work on it.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
And the second thing, of course, is which I teach my team as well, is patiently try to get him to talk about his problems before you hear out what he thinks you should be doing to solve it.
Right.
Or else you just gravitate towards massive feature requests.
Yeah. I thought you were gonna go with like potential users and they're like, oh, I want this would be cool, but like nobody's paying. And then they're like, well, like if I build this, are you gonna pay for it? They're like, oh no. It's like, well then I'm wasting my time.
I mean, selling to enterprises is a lot easier, is what I realized, is generally because they value their own time.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, if they're not interested, they're not going to talk to you because, there's 6 people on a Zoom call. Nobody wants to waste that much of time.
I guess that's a big difference between the like selling to consumers versus selling enterprise, right?
Exactly, exactly. So I feel like, when an enterprise sale, if I feel you have them on the third call, which is first is discovery, second is use case discussion, and the third one is, oh, let's explore a POC. In general, you are on the right track to closing them. Most people drop off after discovery. So,
Right, of course.
that's the place where most amount of drop off will happen.
Like during the discovery, what's something that you as the founder or the business is trying to figure out as quickly as possible? And by the end of that call, do you know if it's going to go to the next one, or do you still have to like, okay, we need to give them time to like, process and come back?
Yeah. A lot depends on how open the team is in discussing things. And what tends to happen is there are some cases where somebody will just come up and say, "Okay, show me what you have." Right? And those are the worst calls because you really don't know whether what you're about to show is important to them. So what I've started doing, most of the calls is I'll do a team introduction and I say, hey guys, I know your time is super important. SquareX does a crazy number of things. I wouldn't want to waste your time telling you about things which are irrelevant. I'm assuming you have an EDR. I'm assuming you have a SASE SSE. And the reason I say I'm assuming, because if I turn and say, do you have an EDR? They're like, oh, I haven't signed an NDA. Maybe I don't want to tell you that.
Oh, interesting. So you've come across this as a problem before where they're like, well, we do, but we can't talk about it kind of thing?
Yeah. So the best thing to do is allow them to refute rather than you taking a confirmatory yes.
Wow. So you say like, I assume you have this. I assume you have that. Shall we continue, or is something different? Wow. You need to write a book, man. Or you got these are such good gold nuggets of how to even do sales. So did you? Okay. Please continue. I have another question about sales after this part.
And then what I do, Chris, is once they say yes or no, then I move on, and they say yes. Then I say, okay, you've been running SASE SSE for a while. I'm guessing these are 4 problems that you're facing and many others. Is this correct? And then people will say, okay, this. And then I say, well, why did you think about talking to SquareX? Did you feel we're going to solve this or any other problem for you? Right? And generally what I do is in the agenda itself, I will just say 5 minutes discovery question. So the big reason is as the person is answering, he's like, okay, like the most I'm going to answer is for 5 minutes. And then after that, you're going to show me. And then he will be patient. No, it's just expectation management because if he feels you're going to bombard him 15 minutes with a question early in the morning at 9 a.m. before he's had his coffee, he doesn't want to talk to you, right? He
Right,
wants
he's
to
already
know.
checked out. He's already checked out immediately. Yeah.
Exactly. So you have to make it clear that this isn't more than 3 to 4 minutes.
Okay. Jesus. So like these are like the most advanced sales tactics I've heard. Someone who's a deep security researcher. How did you learn sales now and to be able to like navigate such difficult ways? Obviously, there's been like trial and error and stuff like that. Obviously, you've gone through the trenches already, but outside of the trenches, if somebody's like, well, I don't want to run through the trenches, and Vivek already did that, like that, it's a bit scary. Maybe there's some other resources that Vivek can give us. Like, what are some ways and additional resources that people can like learn this apart from having to go through the trenches?
Yeah, I would actually say, Chris, I'll give you slightly kind of like interesting answer to this one. I think the first thing is very quickly to understand what is your personality, what is your energy on the call, and what role do you want to play. And what I mean by that is, uh, you always need to get a sales guy along so that people feel he's the sales guy who's going to bullshit me, while Vivek is the founder who's going to talk to me and ask me good questions.
I love this amount of like psychological like development and stuff. This is
Preparation.
brilliant. Yeah,
Correct.
this is
Correct.
yeah.
So, because everybody's so used to the sales guy leading a call and not a founder, right? Or somebody who's technical. So I think that way what happens is I can be matter of fact, I can be serious, I can play to my personality strengths, and I don't have to start talking about the weather and how is it and Iowa today morning and who won the games yesterday night or any of that stuff, right?
I don't know. Okay, you have a sales guy do that, or do you not talk about that at all in the meeting?
I mean, it just depends, right? Like, I mean, different people, different energy, depending on, whichever part of the world they're in. I mean, they love to talk about different things. And people are sometimes used to being a little entertained along with educated on vendor calls, right? So I've seen different energy happen on different calls. So that is one. Of course, I can tell you, I've learned the hard way. Like the first couple of calls I did were miserable.
Oh, right. They
And
always are. They always are.
the best thing to kind of do is you start to very quickly after the 10th call understand the pulse and formulate a strategy around how to lead the call. So what I've realized is very quickly in the first 1 to 2 minutes, or by looking at people's LinkedIn profiles before they come on the call, figure out if this is a non-technical CISO or if this is a technical CISO or are these technical people, right? Tech people hate the marketing bullshit, so you jump in right into the nitty-gritty details and you start talking tech. While if this is a non-technical person, you want to talk about value to customer, high level, problems that you're solving, and quickly try to see if he wants to connect you to the tech folks on the next call.
When you have that high level call with the, as you had just mentioned, do you also like try to point why like revenue matters at that point, or like how or the mitigation of risk for those, or like what's the main concern that they care about?
Yeah,
What are
yeah.
some
You
the
brought up a
deeper
great question, right? So I think for most non-technical CISOs, what may happen is compliance, risk, any new attack they haven't heard about generally are higher priorities. If you go too nitty-gritty details into how the product works and start to do some crazy demos, it wouldn't matter. I think they'll get lost, their attention span will go away. So it's very important you scope the person before you go on the call, which I do for every call, right? Like, most technical people, unfortunately, aren't as vocal on LinkedIn as much as one would assume. That's what I've seen, right? Like, look, you and I, we run our own, companies, podcasts, and things like that. So we are a lot more visible, vocal, verbal on all of these platforms. So generally, what I try to kind of like figure out is, as you said, right? Like, I mean, have they liked an article? What is their background? How do they describe themselves? That's very important. So I think in the LinkedIn, at the very top, you can immediately see how a person describes himself, and that way you try to kind of like understand what the persona is, because the only thing I've kind of self learned in sales is understand what that person prioritizes and try to speak his language.
and try to understand their problems, because that was, I think that's the from my understanding, that's the whole deal with like selling this pen. Like if you just start selling the pen, then you're not the best salesman. But if you understand the problem or why they actually need the pen, then you understand the point of sales, is what I
Exactly.
understand.
I mean, best example is, right now we are talking about such minute details of like, how to sell, how to do, because I know that in your podcast, people watching are all thinking, I'm a security researcher. Can I ever be a seller? I'm a security.
Exactly. Or like, that as well as like, I'm sure you've had this as well, but like as I'm like doing security research or whatever, anytime I spend like having a dream of like starting a company or something else entirely, it's like, if I do that, am I still a hacker? Because this is so much part of my identity, or like of being such the security researcher guy. If I do this, then I'm the business guy. So yeah, please.
And that's where, Chris, that's the big reason why, if you notice, I'm not talking too much about SquareX on your podcast. I'm talking about everything around it. And that's like consciously realizing who your viewers are and trying to speak to them. Because if I just talked about SquareX, what research and everything we do, after some point, your readers are going to be bored. So I think it's a very simple realization is know the person you're talking to, customize the message, be authentic. And as a founder, as a researcher, it is almost mandatory that weekly you need to do posts on your social media. And the big reason is
Really?
exactly that's the only way people get a gateway to who you are and what matters to you, right? And one of the big things I do is every time I have a call with anybody, I will connect to everybody on LinkedIn. Why? First is they get to see who Vivek is online, what has he been doing, the fact that he's dead serious about cybersecurity, been doing this for 25 years, creates trust. Second, Vivek is absolutely vocal about browser security, every aspect of it, every week on LinkedIn, which means this is a founder led company which prioritizes security research, right? Last, you had one call, it was discovery. People are like, this is not my priority, we'll come back to it later. But if they connect to you on LinkedIn and if your profile is popular, your content will inevitably keep surfacing over and over again. And at some day, there is an attack, you can solve it, and they remember because they're used to seeing you on LinkedIn.
Right. It's that comfortability of wanting to work with people that you trust and building that relationship. I mean, like it's being in proximity and growing and being able
Exactly.
to, and being visible, as you said earlier.
And the big thing I would kind of say is like, people feel relationships can only be built in person if you talk to somebody. I don't believe that. I feel in today's world, you can build a relationship with people who follow you, who are connected to you on your social media accounts. And I take so many calls where people are like, hey, Vivek, I've been, seeing your videos on SquareX all the time. See, we forget that people consume information differently. So a lot of people create that prerequisite that only if someone is interacting and commenting on your content is he engaged. That is absolutely untrue, right? If someone watches it, goes through it, he's super engaged already, and we shouldn't discount those people as someone we've already built a relationship with.
Yeah. You got those 4 hour, 5 hour Joe Rogan podcasts, and it's like Joe's not met that. Like people haven't met. Like people will listen to that and be like, I feel like he's right next to me. He's my brother, kind of like they build this like religious figure around these types of individuals because they've heard so much of their content, right? So even now, like we're creating content right now, and like it could be like a year or two later, even down the road, where people are like, wow, this is great content. It's not immediate. It doesn't have to be immediate, and like they can just absorb it, just like you did with your content that you created, that people came to you and it's like, the least we can do is give you our money because of how much value that you've given us in our lives and our careers.
Exactly. So I'm a big believer of, as you said, right? Like, giving things out, interacting with the community, being authentic. As I said, we were the very first to put out every single product video because I was like, hey, what can be more authentic than you being vulnerable openly about how you're solving, a problem others haven't solved before. That means you have to be, I mean, we know as people who are, socially available online is you have to be, open to people writing comments. You have to be open to the trolls. You have to be open to everything.
The trolls, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and honestly, I mean, that is a rite of passage today if you want to build anything, you know.
Yeah. Well, if you want to have any social media presence, yeah, you have to understand, like, yeah, there's going to be trolls, people hating, whatever the case is, but it's just a part of it. But it doesn't define the value that you give to everybody else, right? Because the value that you give out and that you're creating should be more than the attention that you give to, like, it's trolls, whatever the case is. But you mentioned, oh man, all right, sorry, I'm blanking. Being authentic, right? And you can It was one of those things that I read like it, or like I heard is like if it's just written down as like the vision is to be authentic, but then nobody in the company follows it, like then it's just words on paper that no one care about. But when you live it, it's something that always gravitates towards the people that are following you. And I think that you give a strong exemplary of being authentic. As I was doing my research and I'm like looking on YouTube, I'm like, who is this guy? Like all these videos from like, 10 years ago, 12 years ago of you speaking and the way that you're speaking and how you are towards the more recent videos and podcasts that you've been on in the past year talking about your product and company and stuff like that. It's the same level of like enthusiasm as well as a love for the community that you can really expend. So, uh, when you say authentic, when somebody says like, being authentic, sometimes you always wonder like, is this person authentic, because they're saying it. It's kind of like one of those things. It's like, oh, do we trust like trusty Chris? It's like, or like, if their name has trust in the beginning of it, you're always like, okay, they must be trustworthy. But it's also kind of like, do they, sometimes it's the exact opposite, right? So but for you, it's definitely like you can tell from your track record as well as the things that you've done and the way that you approach everything from your business to everything else that it's there. And one thing we hadn't even talked about that I had picked up was like you started a comic book series because of your son and that you wanted to get him more into it, right? Would you like to share some more information about that?
Yeah. So I think, I mean, as I said, I have this habit of challenging myself on things I haven't done. I mean, again, it's the whole security research thing, which kind of manifests itself in other aspects of life. And that is really where I said, hey, I've never done any creative work. And when I say creative, I mean the traditional sense, right? Security research is creative work. Uh, and that is really when that happened. And my son said, oh, I think, Dad, you're a hacker. And, that's a bad thing. And I thought, okay, let me build something to educate, him and kids his age about like how amazing this journey can be of being a, curiosity driven, hacker researcher. So I put out the very first edition. Now actually we have five. I'm going to put those out later in this year. I've kind of gone ahead and blocked out my whole December last week just to work on that. And the idea, Chris, was very simple is we've seen so many hacking movies like The Matrix and everything. And that's really where, you have like Keanu Reeves kind of come in and, kind of pause everything and, the skies part ways and whatnot.
Yeah.
And that's really where I feel, yeah. I mean, that is a lot of young children's introduction into hacking, and they almost feel like it is magical rather than scientific, right? And that is really where the attempt with this comic book was, can you realistically portray how hacks are happening without making it too granular so that, people new to it don't get, overly sucked in and don't really realize what's going on. But I kept it at a reasonable level, but still there was enough, kind of like meaty chunks in there to learn. And it was a pretty big success. I think we gave out a lot of free comics. I think we gave out like 40,000 free comics across different conferences, and dozens, if not actually close to 100 plus people have written to me with suggestions and whatnot. Definitely, I'm hoping I can carve out a little bit more time so that I can finish the whole series. But this is like a passion project. Absolutely enjoyed every minute of it. And yeah, I mean, like sometimes we all love doing things which aren't really work, but yeah, this was one of them.
That's beautiful. I always have difficulties like trying to carve out creativity time because I'm always like, oh, I could be learning. I could be, I could be doing something else that's like like more productive. So maybe have you also felt this way? Like, I don't know if it's just kind of just me or like other types of researchers where it's like even just playing the piano, it's like, this is fun, but it's like, yeah, but maybe I should be like studying or reading a security blog or something like that.
Yeah, actually, you brought up a good point, right? Uh, and this is just my thesis, and this completely off for someone else. So take it with a kind of like a grain of salt or a bag of salt. Uh, my perspective is in different phases of your life, I think the importance of certain things is much higher. So when you're, let's say starting off your career and you want to establish yourself, every freaking minute should just go into that, which is what I did. You're right. Like nothing was important to me more than my security research, my website, Pen Tester Academy for years and years and years, right? Never took a single vacation. Never ever. Like whole 8 years of Pen Tester Academy, I don't remember taking a single vacation, right? because all I wanted was, as a first generation entrepreneur, just wanted that success so badly, right? And this was my only opportunity, right? Like some things worked out, I'm on that track, want to make it happen. I think when you're in that phase, I agree with you, everything else is bullshit. Everything else is noise. Apart from some important family time, everything else is. So the only three things I would say is like, family time, exercising because sitting will catch up.
Oh, exercise is always important. Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Yeah. And the third thing is every other living moment putting it into, work. Now, as you kind of go into different phases of life, things, works out and all of that, then I think it's important to diversify your interest pool a little bit. Is simply because, look, I mean, end of the day, life is finite. You want to kind of like make sure that you tried everything that you desired. And I think I'm in that phase, right? Like I'm now 44 years old. I'm in that like rough midlife phase where I'm like, okay, I wouldn't say there is a countdown timer, but at the very same time, I also look at it and say, you know what, like there are many things that I haven't done, I haven't tried. I want to keep aside some time just to do that. So now, over the weekends, as an example, I will at least spend 70% of my weekends just with my family, making sure that hey, that is time well spent, and not because they need it, is because I also enjoy it. There's very big difference. You can do something as a duty and a responsibility, or you can do something because you truly want it yourself. And I think people on the other side can see the difference, can they feel the difference, right? So I feel I enjoy that now. I really relish that. During the weekdays, it's pretty heavy duty, probably don't get as much time. So I think just important. So I mean, I give you a very long winding answer, but yeah, I mean, like I've always wanted to take some musical lessons, but never happened. No regrets there. Uh, Definitely the ones at this point where I, prioritize is family time. No matter what, I hit the gym like 5 to 6 times a week now because
Oh, wow. Congratulations. Yeah. That's terrific. I
yeah.
guess during the weekdays, maybe like right when you wake up or
Yeah,
in
yeah.
the
So what I
evenings.
do is,
Yeah.
I generally wake up by 6 a.m. I hit the gym by 6:30, 6:30 to 7:30, 1 hour. I almost feel now it's become mandatory at 44. I mean, I look at this as more medicine than,
Yes. It's
something.
preventative measures for long-term health. Like my wife and I we're active gym members because like we want to have a long life and like we want to have spend our time with our children and everything else. So, yeah.
Correct. Yeah, exactly. So I think, yeah, but rest of it, I think is part. I mean, you can't have it all. That's what I say to tell people. A lot of folks, super young folks, founders ask me, and I say, look, man, the biggest dream that you don't want to chase is you want to have it all. At some phases, you'll probably have to sacrifice some things. There's nothing much you can do about it. Make sure it's a sacrifice you can live with, and make sure the sacrifice is well worth it. And that's the big reason why, I'm so opinionated about founders making sure they don't screw up a 5 year journey just because they thought they wanted to build a $10 billion organization and nothing came out, right? Because 5 to 6 years, you want to make sure it counts for something, you sacrifice, but everybody around you is also sacrificing.
So even if it doesn't turn out to be the unicorn, at least gain something good from
Exactly.
it if possible. Yeah.
Exactly. And people, I think people make that critical mistake of not realizing that any exit changes your orbit, permanently, right? And most importantly, any failure over 5 to 6 years, also in a very, very bad way, hits on your confidence, unfortunately, at times on self respect and whatnot. Because look, most of us, when we start our trajectory, we look at our peers and everybody's graduated from college and, people are starting to work. And then when you suddenly decide to be an entrepreneur, chalk your own path, that's a big break off from, the conventional path that you were planning. So 5, 6 years down the line, you want to just make sure. I actually feel if you play it right, if you're looking at the space right, getting to some semblance of success, if you've been at it really hard, I don't think it's difficult. I mean, building a unicorn may be a 9 out of 10 failure rate, but needing a mid-sized profitable business which you can exit for a really good sum of money, I think can be reasonably prescriptive.
Got it. Uh, One thing I wanted to ask was that you mentioned like the EBITDA thing. That was like you don't look at that if but is that specific to like if it's a product based business versus like a service based business, or because like if it's a service based business is would you still say like look at the type of money that you're gonna bring them in
It's a
as
great
your
question.
services?
It's a great question. So I actually feel you're right. Intrinsically, a service-based business has nothing more, right? Because most service-based businesses are people-intensive, which means if an acquirer comes in, all he's buying is good client relationships and a hope that he can keep your employees happy. Where the client relationships are more, I would say, more permanent in a way, or at least he has a longer time to ensure they can carry on. Uh, Honestly, I feel you can start a great services business uh, and eventually try to convert that into a product business. And this is exactly what I did with Pentester, right? I started off with a service-based business, which is I was going training people. Then I went online, did training, but I quickly converted that to a subscription service, a lab platform, had a technology component. Had I not had that, I don't think we would have had a great exit. I don't think, because look, end of the day, a services business in education would have been me making videos, me going and training. The videos will get obsolete, my content will get obsolete, topics will get obsolete, right? But the only thing which remains is if you create a lab platform, as an example, back in the day, that is something people can reuse for many different things. So you're right. You want to decide on it now. Your very first business, if you do it bootstrapped, almost inevitably will be a services business because where is the money coming from for you to, you know, build a product, nurture a product? So in my view, it's almost like a rite to passage, uh, and there's absolutely okay with it. But keep your expectations, right as well when you build a services business.
So and then when you integrate and start building the product based business, specifically your guys's, because it's really interesting. Like you didn't have any customers, or you didn't have anybody say like, "Hey, you know what you really need to do is like make the examples in the browsers." Like, did you, or were more people, or was it like an idea that like this might be a good idea, and then that was what came out of it?
Yeah, yeah. I think there are two ways to build a company, right? Like one is you yourself are new to the space, which means you're talking to enough customers because you're in love with the problem, but you haven't seen it long enough yourself, right? Uh, the other way is that you've lived and seen this problem, as a first person view for a very long time, and you have reasonable confidence in your gut feeling. So I would say, having been in cybersecurity, looking at how red teams work, how attackers work, this was more of a gut feeling that a browser redaction response makes sense. Nobody's built it in the industry. There's this category called enterprise browsers, but they are primarily talking about private app access, access control, and all of that. Very little to do with attack detection. And my gut feeling was that, hey, people are going to need it. All attacks happen in the browser. And I think I started from that thesis, right? Now, where did the market correct me? When I started talking to customers, I quickly realized that people don't have the level of nuanced understanding, or very few CISOs have the level of nuanced understanding of client side web attacks as much as me and the team does. And I realized that, which means I can't talk about these 25 attacks. I just need to talk about three or four that they can relate to and then build on that. So I would say you can start with a gut feeling. The market teaches you how to map it to, your existing market's needs. And there you have to be very flexible on how you do it.
And for Pentester Academy, or not security too, but Pentester Academy, when you guys were doing the certificates, right? That was a service based business, and then you shifted it over to product run, right? So how did you know that that product was going to that was that you could sell it, or that it was valuable at the time? Was it a feature that eventually became its own product, or did you have customers saying like, this would be really helpful?
Yeah, I think early on, Chris, with Pentester Academy, I think I just felt like, okay, if I could just, honestly, if I could just make like enough money as I would have made in the industry, that was good enough for me. Very quickly, that went to, me feeling the need like, okay, if I made enough money that I could do this for the rest of my life, right? Of course, the bar goes up then. Uh, and you're right. I think customers teach you. with Pen Tester Academy, when I started first with just doing trainings, people said, I wish you could put more updated material online. I could refer to it. That's how the online stuff started. When the online stuff started, just as certification, people said, look, I'd be happy to pay for more premium content. Once that happened, people said, oh, you know what, like we are seeing other people put up some labs. Could you build like even more detailed labs? Back in those days, I think eLearn Security, Offensive Security, all of these guys, had some VM based labs. And I had a very different view on it. I wanted to use containers and, run everything through the browser and all of that. So I felt like that was a very big wake up call. I still remember I told my team that in the next 6 months, if we don't build labs, I don't think the company will exist. Is simply because people needed more hands-on content, and that's how I made that transition. So yeah, I mean, like you just have to listen to what customers are saying, and try to delight them as much as possible. And I think like things slowly start to come. And most importantly, you have to be patient. Nothing happens overnight.
Right. Thank you so much for being a guest on our show, Vivek. It's been a tremendous insights that you've been able to present to us and give to us. Thank you so much. We're going to take all of these things and share them with the audience. So is there anything else that you'd like to share about, your company, your product, and where you guys are going?
Yeah, I mean, I think, for anything you want to know about the company and product, SquareX.com, we post videos, blogs, and whatnot. And of course, you can follow me on like LinkedIn and Twitter. So, yeah.
Excellent. We'll include all of that in the description below. So thank you so much for your time, Vivek. It's been a pleasure having you on our podcast.